Rows of sweaty young soldiers stand under a scorching sun, staring at a 6-foot wall. Their task, get all 8 of them, and a long heavy log, to the other side, without the log touching the ground or the wall, and without anyone touching the wall. Nearby, a young psychologist named Daniel Kahneman watches alongside a colleague, serving in the Israeli Army's psychology branch. He's helping assess candidates for officer training. He watches who takes charge, who gives up, and who steps forward when the exhausted group has to start over. By the time the assessment ends, he's confident. He can already picture who will thrive in combat and who won't. Months later, the results come back from officer training school. His predictions are better than blind guessing, but not by much. He should feel shaken. Instead, the very next assessment day, watching a new group of soldiers haul that same log to that same wall, the same rock-solid confidence floods right back in, as if the humbling data belonged to someone else. He knows intellectually that the test barely works. He feels, with total certainty, that it does. That gap between what we know and what we feel sure of is what the rest of this video is about. Kahneman spent the next several decades of his career trying to explain that gap. It led him to a simple but unsettling idea. Your mind runs on 2 different systems. One is fast. Try this. What's 2 plus 2? The answer just appeared, uninvited, before you even meant to think about it. That's System 1. Automatic, instant, always running in the background, forming impressions and judgments whether you ask it to or not. Now try 17 times 24. Nothing pops up. You have to slow down, hold numbers in your head, actually work for it. That's System 2. Deliberate, effortful, and, crucially, lazy. It only steps in when summoned, and most of the time, it isn't. It was System 1 that made those Army evaluators feel sure about strangers after watching the candidates make several attempts. System 2 never got the memo to double-check. Most of what feels like your own judgment is actually System 1 quietly deciding first and handing System 2 a conclusion to rubber stamp. If you run a business, hire people, or make decisions under pressure, the danger isn't that you're not smart enough. It's that you rarely notice which system just decided for you. System 1 doesn't just jump to conclusions on its own. It can be quietly hijacked by numbers that have nothing to do with the decision at hand. In one of Kahneman and Tversky's most famous experiments, people watched a wheel of fortune spin, rigged to land on either 10 or 65. Then they were asked a completely unrelated question. What percentage of United Nations member countries are African? People who'd just seen the wheel land on 65 guessed much higher percentages than people who'd seen it land on 10. The number was arbitrary and had nothing to do with the question. It still pulled their estimates toward it. Kahneman and Tversky called this anchoring. An early number can quietly pull the judgments that follow toward it, even when it has no legitimate connection to the judgment being made. Negotiate a price, a raise, a deal, and whoever names the first number can begin shaping the outcome, whether or not either side realizes it. Anchoring hijacks judgment with a number sitting nearby. System 1 makes an even bigger, everyday mistake with stories. In one classic survey, most people judged accidental death more likely than death from stroke, even though strokes caused nearly twice as many deaths as all accidents combined at the time. It's not that people are innumerate, it's that vivid, dramatic causes of death are simply easier for the mind to picture, and System 1 quietly substitutes easy to picture for common. Kahneman points to this as a textbook case of what he and Tversky called the availability heuristic. We don't judge how likely something is, we judge how easily an example comes to mind, and mistake that ease for truth. Whatever gets replayed the most, in the news, in your industry's gossip, in your own worried imagination, starts to feel more common and more dangerous than it actually is, simply because it's vivid, not because it's frequent. That's how one scary headline can move markets, and one bad review can convince a business owner their whole product is failing. These shortcuts don't just distort what we believe is true, they distort what we're willing to give up. In one deceptively simple study, half a classroom was handed a coffee mug and asked the lowest price they'd sell it for. The other half, empty-handed, was asked the most they'd pay to buy that same mug, same object, same room, same students. The owners demanded roughly double what the buyers were willing to offer. Nothing about the mug had changed, only who currently held it. This is the endowment effect, closely linked to loss aversion, a central feature of Kahneman and Tversky's prospect theory. In many decisions, a loss can carry roughly twice the psychological weight of an equivalent gain. That's why you might lose your spot can motivate more than you might gain a spot, and why something can become harder to give up once it starts to feel like yours. If losing something hurts more than gaining the same thing feels good, how we remember pain and pleasure over time turns out to be just as strange. In one randomized study, patients undergoing colonoscopies reported their pain throughout the procedure. One group received the standard procedure. For another group, the instrument remained in place for a few extra minutes without further probing, allowing the discomfort to ease before the procedure ended. That second group endured a longer procedure and more total discomfort, yet later remembered it as less unpleasant and was slightly more likely to return for another colonoscopy. Their memory of the procedure was shaped disproportionately by the worst moment and by the ending. Duration mattered surprisingly little. Kahneman calls this the difference between the experiencing self, who lives every moment, and the remembering self, who writes the story afterward and influences future decisions. How an experience ends can shape your memory of it far more than its duration would suggest, which means the last 5 minutes of a customer's visit, a project, or even a difficult conversation can disproportionately shape how the entire experience is remembered. Put these examples side by side, and the same pattern keeps appearing. The confident officer who can't out-argue his own bad track record. The negotiator anchored by a number that was never true to begin with. The headline that feels more dangerous than the statistic. The mug that's suddenly worth twice as much the moment it's yours. The memory that cares more about the ending than the whole. In every case, the mind compresses a complicated reality into a fast, coherent judgment, and rarely tells you what was lost in the process. The research, the caveats, and the decades of experiments behind these ideas make thinking fast and slow worth reading in full. Your mind has already decided how it feels about this video. The only real question is whether that feeling would survive a slower, more careful look. Hit subscribe if you want the next one.